Hello everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you to the premiere of ZSL's third Science and Conservation event of our 2024 to 2025 programme. My name is Matthew Woolf and I'm a project manager here at ZSL supporting tiger conservation projects within the Transboundary Terai Arc landscape, which are led by our in-country programme teams in Nepal and India. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event where I'm kindly joined by two of my esteemed colleagues from our Nepal programme team, Dr. Dinesh Nupain and Mr. Sunjeep, who will be providing an overview of megafauna species recovery and human-wildlife conflict patterns throughout the Terai Arc landscape over the past 2 decades, before deep diving into what the latest scientific studies are telling us about human-tiger conflict across Nepal. Following Dinesh and Sunjeep's presentation, we will be discussing some key questions relating to human-tiger conflict in more detail through a dedicated question and answer session. Please share your thoughts about today's event using the hashtag ZSL Talks and tagging ZSL Science, because we'd love to hear from you about how you found today's presentations. Before I introduce you to our two speakers, I'd like to tell you about why we're here today, talking about tiger conservation in the Terai Arc landscape of Nepal. The Terai Arc landscape is home to many charismatic mammals such as Asian elephants, one-horned rhinoceros, and Bengal tigers, and Nepal's commitment to conserving these species has been clearly demonstrated and recognised, with the Terai Arc landscape having been recognised as one of the 7 UN World Restoration flagships as part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. In the tiger space, Nepal has also achieved considerable conservation success, with Nepal becoming the first country to achieve the global doubling of its wild tiger numbers between the years 2010 and 2022, as pledged by tiger range countries during the St. Petersburg Declaration of 2010. This stunning result is a testament to the effectiveness of Nepal's collaborative approach to tiger conservation. However, conservationists also recognise that during this time, human-wildlife conflict across the landscape as a whole is growing. The extent to which this increase in tiger population has contributed to some of the increased human-wildlife conflict in the landscape therefore deserves further exploration and highlights some of the challenges associated with reviving populations of large carnivores. Now, with the scene set, I'm delighted to introduce you today to today's two speakers from the ZSL Nepal programme, Dr. Dinesh Nupain and Mr. Sunjeep. So welcome to the both of you. Dr. Dinesh is a conservation biologist headquartered at ZSL's Nepal office in Kathmandu. He holds a PhD and an MSc in environmental sciences, specialising in wildlife management from Arkansas State University and another MSc in wildlife management from Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu. Dinesh's professional experience includes serving as a project lead for megafauna conservation and as an executive director at the Resources Himalaya Foundation and as a research fellow at Xishangbana Tropical Botanical Garden in China. Dinesh has contributed significantly to the field through his research on human-wildlife conflict and habitat ecology, publishing nearly 24 articles in peer-reviewed journals. Our second speaker, Mr. Sunjeep, is a senior program officer also based at ZSL Kathmandu office, who holds an MSc in natural resource management and rural development and a BSc in forestry, both from the Institute of Forestry at Tribhuvan University. Sunjeep is primarily responsible for leading technical activities across ZSL's tiger, human-wildlife conflict, mitigation, and livelihoods programs in Nepal, and has a specific interest in the assessment of how climate change is predicted to impact tiger habitats across Nepal. Sunjeep has a decade's worth of experience working across different technical conservation roles, where he has supported the digital demarcation and mapping of forest management regimes and scientific forest management plans for community forests within the Terai Arc landscape and the mid-hill region of Nepal. Right, with both gentlemen now introduced, I would like to hand over to Dinesh, who's going to kick us off with the presentations. So Dinesh, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the nice introduction. And good morning, everyone. As Matt told, we are going to talk about the human-tiger conflict, particularly human-wildlife conflict and the human-tiger conflict in Terai Arc landscape. This talk has 2 sessions. In the first session, Sanjeev will talk about the Terai Arc landscape, its conservation opportunity, and the challenges that occurs throughout for the conservation. In the second session, I will be talking about the human-wildlife conflict, particularly tiger conflict in the landscape. So with that note, I would like to request Sanjeev to take care the presentation. Sanjeev? The floor is yours.
I would like to start the presentation with the slide, as you know, that the history of Nepal's role in the Thai art landscape. So, those who are not familiar with Nepal, you can see here Nepal is about 150 square kilometers in area that is in the South Asia between India and China. And while talking about conservation, the forest plays a vital role. And here I can say that with the national policies and the acts that categorize Nepal's forest into two parts, mainly the private forest that is privately owned and the national forest. And the national forest is further categorized into community managed forest and government managed forest. Community managed forests are those that are handed over to the community for the management and utilization and for sustainable productions. And the government managed forests are those which are under the government jurisdiction, and management is also the government's responsibility. And you can see that out of total areas of country, 45%, more than 45% of the country's area is under the forest, and more than 23% of the area is under the protected area system. And these protected area cover more than 70% of the forest area of the country. And you can see that the Nepal has the possibility of extending its protected area system to meet the global goal of increasing its protected area to up to 30%, that is OECM. So here we can see the history of conservation in Nepal, and it starts from 1970. You can see there was the strict protection system in 1970s, and it was shifted to integrated ICTP, that is Integrated Conservation and Development Programs, in 1980s, and in 1990s it was the revenue sharing through the establishment of the buffer zone, and 30 to 50% of the park's revenue goes to the buffer zone. And in the 2000s, you can see that the prioritism is shift to the landscape approach by the establishment of the Tal area. And in the left, you can see the figure that shows how the tiger conservation, the specific conservation started, and the tiger conservation started to grow. And in 2010, it was the St. Petersburg summit where Nepalese government and other tiger-bearing countries' government pledged to double its tiger population by 2022. And as you can see, Matt has already explained that Nepal has already more than doubled its tiger population, and the further next step is to have a carrying capacity assessment, and the human wildlife conflict is another issue that comes with the increased tiger number. And the other vision is to have the coexistence and sustainable tiger conservation. And as you said, that as you see, the Tal is the transboundary landscape. It covers the area of Nepal and of India, and basically in Nepal it occupies five tiger conservation units. That is Parsa in the east, to the Suklafata in the west, and seven important tiger corridors in these areas. And you can see in this figure, this area is also home to the major grasslands that is very vital for the prey population of tigers. And the area is the zone where we can see the huge river systems. This is Karnali River, and not just for the tiger. This is also the area is very productive for the community as well, because the area is you can see in this figure that how the crop is growing between the forest. And talking about the remarkable conservation, not just the tiger, but also other major species, including elephant, gaur, and rhinos are also increasing. But for tiger, it's remarkable and very significant. It's about more than 193% increase in the tiger number, with reference to the base in the year 2010. That was 121. And so why the tiger is important? As we already know that the government pledged to double its tiger in 2010. So the tiger conservation is that is why the tiger is the most important species to conserve. And not just the tiger, conservation is important for tiger itself, because conserving the tiger will conserve its habitat, associated species, and the other important species as well. And how the tiger conservation and its significant achievement achievement was we achieved this significant number by in the first photo. You can see that this is the photo of a tiger that is captured through the camera trap. That is an example of regular camera trap survey for the tiger. And in the second photo, the involvement of community people itself for the awareness raising of the community. And in the third photo, you can see the advancement in the law enforcement related activity, mainly the patrolling and anti-poaching activities. And the fourth photo shows the improved and increased collaboration between Nepal and India, that is the transboundary collaboration. So specific about the tiger, we can see that we can now further divide the Tal area that falls into Nepal into three categories, three areas, that is three complexes, mainly Porsa and Chiton complexes in the east, and Bake and Bardha complex in the middle part, and the Suklapata complex in the western part. And the tiger number in these complexes as individually is also increasing. Most importantly, the Bake Bardha complex, you can see the tiger number from the baseline has more than 7 folds, increased by more than 7 folds, and similar with the Sukla Panda. And there is a slight increase in the Parsa Chiton as well. Not just the tiger number, you can see the prey number is also increasing, and it's good because tiger are the main carnivorous species, and they are heavily rely on meat for their survival. And with this increasing prey number, the increasing prey number also play a slight role in the sustainable tiger conservation in its wild habitat. So it's just a tiger number increasing in Tal. Here you can see that not just the tiger number, but also the people residing in the area is also increasing. By 2011 to 2020 to 21, there is 18% increase in the total population that is living in the Tal. That is, you can see only in 17% of the country's area, more than 1/3 of the population is living. So this leads to this kind of situation. Here in this photo, you can see the scattered human settlement, fast human settlement, alongside the tiger settlement, and there is a very thin line that divides the human settlement and the wildlife habitat. And in the another photo, I want to show you that this strip of the tiger habitat that is in the Terai Arc landscape, that for the connection of these two huge human settlements, a lot of infrastructure, linear infrastructures are going on, and this is the canal, and this is the road, and this is the high tension transmission line. So here, up to this slide, I have a bit talk about the number of wildlife increase in Tal, and the people are also living in the Tal are also increasing. And for the well-being of people, there are various facilities are also increasing for the people that may lead to differentiation or the degradation of the tiger habitat. So from this slide onward, I want to introduce Dinesh and the stage is yours, Dinesh, Dr. Dinesh. Thank you.
So, as Sanjeep discussed, the Terai Arc landscape is the breadbasket for the Nepal. It has a high potential for the agricultural production. At the same time, it has a high human density area, and then it's a biodiversity hotspot in Nepal. And the remaining habitat, the tiger habitat and the other wildlife habitats are fragmented. So with that four characteristics, human wildlife conflict or the human wildlife interaction can be expected, but sometimes this kind of human wildlife interaction lead to the conflict, may arising the negative attitudes towards the conservation in the landscape. So if we see the human-wildlife conflict scenario in Terai Arc landscape, most of the wildlife that are involved in the human wildlife are involved are the elephants, leopard, tiger, rhino, and the wild boars. That means the carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores are all involved in the conflict in Terai Arc landscape. If you see in the last 5 years, the elephant-related conflict is in decreasing order. However, there is a few changes in the last 2 years, but the omnivore related conflict, that means wild boar related conflict, is increasing in order in the overall entire landscape. But if we see in the landscape level, in the complex level, in Parsa Chitan complex, the rhino related conflict is huge. That means, as we know, the Chiton holds the second largest rhino population in the world. So the conflict from the rhino is in Chiton and Parsa complex, but the wild boar related conflict is comparatively low in that landscape, but the elephant related conflict is a little bit high. But if you go to the back in Bardia complex, you can see the leopard related conflict is a significant number along with the wild boar related conflict. But in Shukla Phata, there was no tiger related conflict at the human in the landscape. But if you see the wild boar related conflict, it is increasing in order. At the same time, the leopard related conflict is also increasing in order. So that gives the scenario of the human wildlife conflict in the landscape. And each complexes has different assemblies of the wildlife that are associated with these kind of conflicts. And if we see the type of the damage that the wildlife has been creating in the Tal complex, you can see the majority of the conflicts from the crop damages, followed by the livestock depredations, and a few incidents for the human casualties or the human attack and the property damage in that landscape. But in the Chitan Parsa complex, if you see the majority of conflict is from in the crop damages, and that is obvious because we see the rhino is more frequent conflict causing animal in that landscape. That's why the crop damage is huge in that area. And then the human attack is or the human injury or casualty is being increased in the recent year. If you go to the back end Bardia complex, we can see the crop damage is not that much changed in the time period, but the livestock depredation is a little bit increasing in the order. And then in Shukla Phata, the human casualty in the last year, it was not there was no any human casualty in 2022, but the property damage is a little bit high in the recent year, but crop damage is huge in that landscape as well. So we can see how many animals are, what type of animals that are involved in that area, and then what are the conflicts that has been resulted from these animals in the landscape. So in this slide, we have been analyzing who are most impacted from the human wildlife conflict. We can see here the crop damage. That means either in the farmhouse, or the agricultural land, or in the storage. One of the significant damage that has been resulted from the human wildlife conflict in the scenario. And then followed by the livestock depredation. That is around 1/3 of the conflict cases is from the livestock depredation. Only a very few number of the cases is related to the human injury or human death. But if we see if we see who or like which people are more impacted, you can see the disadvantaged people like Dalit, indigenous people, or the ethnic community are more impacted in that area, and this is because of their practices, home use practices, and their dependence on the natural resources. And then if you and then the most of the migrant people who are migrated from the Hill to the Terai, they have been also impacted because the peoples who are migrated from the Hill are settled in the forest age, and their dependency to the natural resources is high. Because of these kind of practices, the human-wildlife conflict is more in that communities. If we see the seasonal pattern of the human-wildlife conflict in the scenario, we can see the winter after the monsoon. The human-wildlife conflict is in escalating trend. If you and then until the winter. So if we see the specific pattern, the elephant has most of the impact in the winter season, and then the wild boars as well. But if you see the leopard related conflict, it is similar throughout the time period, throughout the year. And then the rhino rhino related conflict is in the winter season, that is January and February. This kind of trend is related to the human practices or the agricultural practices that people have been following in that area. In the winter rice harvesting season is the people have been practicing the rice harvesting as well as the wheat harvesting that January and February period. So these kind of practices, the traditional cropping pattern is one of the associated factors for the human wildlife conflict in that area. The Nepal government has also some kind of monetary mechanisms to provide some support to the affected communities. If you see the cases of the damage from the wildlife, the 35% of the cases is from the elephants, and then the only 6% is associated with the tigers. But if you see the number of the amounts that the government has been supporting for the damage, the 32% of the amount goes for the elephants damage, and the 25% of the cases the 25% of them the monetary value goes for the tiger conflict. So the per case, the tiger damage cost around 65,000 Nepalese rupees, which is equivalent to like 400 a pound. And the rhino related conflict is like an NPR 28,000, but the wild boar related conflict is only 8,000. So the case wise, the tiger conflict or the leopard conflict is less, but the monetary cost to the government is huge because they have attacking to the peoples for their lives and the livestock. If we see in the last 5 years, most of the conflict occurs in the recent period. And then if you see the top of the area, these are the human casualties. And then the number is the dot line is also increasing in the order. That means the human casualties is increasing in the trend. And then the most of the amount goes for the livestock depredations, as you see the number of the cases in the right side figure. So this is just a scenario of human wildlife in the landscape, but we are trying to understand what factor is influencing the human tiger conflict in that area. We have been compiling the information from the secondary sources and the peer-reviewed journals, and then some preliminary analysis that we have been conducting here. In Baki Bardea complex, one of the study from the Powder et al. 2024 identified 58% of the victims are male in Baki Bardea complex when we talk about the human casualties. And then elephants, tiger, following elephants are the major animals involved in the human casualty in that landscape. If you see in the right figure, the most of the cases, the human casualties occurred in the edge of the forest, in the corridor, or in the buffer zone of the national park. So people residing in the national on the edge of the forest, relying more on the natural forest for their dependence, for their subsistence, they are more impacted for the human casualties in that landscape. If we see the practices or the activities that people are involved while being attacked, you can see the people who have been involved in the grass cutting or collection, cattle grazing, firewood collections, or fishing, they have been more impacted or they have been attacked. And then if you see the people who have pretend to be the prey activities like bike stop or bow down, and then that kind of activities have been influential for the tiger or leopard attack in that area. If you see the diurnal pattern of the attack, you can see the most of the attacks is in the daytime. So This is because most of the people are involved in the outdoor activity in the daytime. So that's why if we encourage people to be involved in the alternative income generating activities, not depending on the natural resources, that can mitigate the human wildlife conflict or human tiger conflict in that landscape. The another paper has talked about the people's attitudes or the tolerance levels towards tiger conservation. You can see here in that figure, the people are thinking the tiger population has been increasing in trend, but they have been thinking that the tiger attack is not in that is not associated with the tigers numbers. The tigers and then that kind of tolerance level or the attitude is influential with the settlements or associated with the settlement type and the educations. If the people are more educated, they have a more positive or more tolerance towards tiger conservation, and the settlements that has less forest vegetation, and these settlement characteristics are influential for the human tiger conflict. The another paper talk about education and then the practices that people have been involved in the settlements, and then how they have been influential to create the attitudes towards tiger conservation. If you see the people who have involved in the forest vegetation once in a year are like a very less, and that kind of people has more positive towards the tiger conservation. That means they have a greater tolerance level. You can see here. And then the educated people are more positive towards the tiger conservation. And then the probability of tiger sighting is associated with the ecological variables. The people can see the tigers near to the forest and grazing lands and the water resources. But there is high probability to see the tigers further from the households, and then higher probability to see the tigers near to the forest, near to the households and the roads. That means if people have been involved in the outdoor activities, like income generating activities, not just with the forest, as I said, not in like if we promote the stall feeding, and then less frequency of visiting tiger, the forest area can be mitigated, can helps to mitigate the human wildlife conflict in that area. And then another study that is in the Chitan National Park buffer zone identified that the tigers are attacking to the large livestock, that means cow and buffalo, and then the leopard are more attacking to the medium to small size cattle, including the goat, sheep, and pig. That means the mitigation measures should be separated from the tigers to the leopard. That means we can promote livestock said for the tiger, and then the predator-proof calls for the leopards to promote to mitigate the human wildlife conflict or human carnivore conflict in the area. The another study in the Basa National Park identified the most of the conflict occurs in the northern part of area. If we talk about the tiger-related conflict, one of the administrative unit in the northern buffer zone has higher conflict from the tiger, and then the leopard conflict is in the southern border, and the other administrative in the northern part of buffer zone. But the wild boar conflict is another administrative unit in the northern buffer zone and the southern buffer zone. That means the predator like leopard and tigers are not overlapping in the same area. At the same time, they are not overlapping with the prey species. So the tiger and leopard, that means carnivores, are following the prey species. That means if the prey related conflict is in the human settlements further from the national park, the tiger conflict can be expected in that areas. That means the northern purpose in that area is connected with the national forest from the national park. So if we promote such kind of corridor in that area, the human wildlife conflict can be mitigated. If we talk about the forest distance, why the relief amount risk, that means the intensity of the damages, the carnivore related damage is not the difference with the distances, but the herbivores and omnivores related. That means tiger, the elephants and rhino related conflict, and the wild boar related conflict is highly significant with the distance from the forest, from buffers and forest. If we see the trend of the human tiger conflict or the human wildlife conflict in Parsa National Park in last 5 years, we can see here the herbivore related conflict is increasing in order, but in the carnivore related conflict is in decreasing order. So as Sunjeep mentioned, the tiger number in Parsa National Park is highly increased in last 5 years. And then has to do with the prey base as well. So that two figures indicate that with the increase of prey or the predator, the conflict cannot go along with the same numbers. So that means if there is a good intervention for the conservations and the mitigation measures or the habitat management, the conflict can be reduced and the animals can be kept inside the national park without keeping or the human-wildlife coexistence can be created in the area. Is the relief amount that people have been asking or the claiming and the receiving is differences. If we see the difference between the claim amount versus the receive amount is higher in the lower amount of damages that is related to the crop damages. And if we see the damages related to the human casualty and property damage, the differences between the claim amount and the receive amount is not much. So that is related to the compensation mechanisms that that helps to make this kind of differences. In a summary, we can see here that the tiger's corridor could be in the northern part of area in the Chure Hills, and because this area are less dense in terms of human population, and then the less cost path for the tigers to move around the reported areas. In the previous slide, we can see the tiger are following the corridors. So the sourcing dynamics and the maintenance of this corridor through connectivity is important. And then the human wildlife conflict is associated with the water availability. So the keeping water available inside the protected areas could be one of the important interventions that can mitigate the human wildlife conflict or human tiger conflict in the area. As marginal people, particularly indigenous people who are more dependent on the natural resources, are more vulnerable. So the livelihood upliftment programs providing the opportunity to have alternative income generating activities can reduce the interaction with the tigers or the wildlife. So such kind of intervention is necessary for the human tiger human wildlife conflict in the landscape. With that note, I would like to stop my presentation here. If there is any questions or concern, we'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for your presentations. So many fascinating points that have been raised, and a great starting point from us to begin our Q&A session. I think just before we start, it's important to say you've given a great assessment of human-wildlife conflict scenario across the Terai landscape in the context of recovering populations of large mammals such as tigers and rhinos. So the case of wildlife recovery in Nepal does give us some really interesting lessons that I'm sure can be shared elsewhere. It also shows how the solid scientific understanding of animal behavior and conflict patterns can be used to guide mitigation methods, which ultimately encourage coexistence between people and wildlife, such as tigers, which is why we're all here. Okay, so I think to kick off the Q&A, Dinesh, I'd like to ask you, from one of your slides in relation to Parsa National Park, it looked like the human-wildlife conflict relief payments were disproportionately high for tigers compared to other species. What do you think are the main reasons behind that?
Thank you, Matt, for this question. The number of the cases associated with the tiger conflict is less, but the amount that the people have been receiving or the government has been providing is huge. This is because the tigers or the carnivores are more attacking to the human lives and the livestock as well. So that caused the huge economic loss. And another concern is like the relief guidelines that government has formulated to support the affected communities. As per the Nepal's relief guideline, if the person is impacted from the human casualties or the human death, they can get the amount of 1 million Nepalese rupees for the human death. And then the casualties is the casualty amount could be as per the bill. That means the as much as the hospital bills comes up for the injuries. And the livestock, we have a huge, like a larger number of the compensation mechanism as well. For the livestock damage, the people can get around 20,000 rupees, up to the 20,000 rupees for the damages. So, but for the crop damages, people cannot get not more than 10,000 for the cases. And this is because the compensation mechanism or the compensation amount related to the tiger conflict is high, and then the mostly the rhino and elephants are more associated with the crop damages, and then the amount of the damages in the crop field is huge, and that's why people are asking for more amount for their damage, but is from the guideline, they cannot receive more than 10,000. That's why the amount differences is high in the lower amount of the claims. But for the larger kind of claim, the compensation mechanism is good enough. That's why we think the real field-based evaluation and the providing the much compensation or much relief amount to the victim family is one of the solutions to create the coexistence in the landscape.
Thanks for your answer. And yes, I completely see the if the most tragic events are disproportionately caused by one species, it's kind of gives the importance of how necessary it is to be working on projects mitigating human-tiger conflict. So thank you for that answer. And then, so beyond just the human-wildlife conflict relief payments, could you talk more about what some of the main measures the Nepalese government are implementing to ensure human-tiger conflict in the landscape is minimized?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, the relief guideline is one of the measures that the Nepal government has been formulating for the mitigation of human-wildlife conflict or creating the coexistence in the landscape. I think this guideline is one of the dynamic guidelines that has been revised frequently within a decade to make it comprehensive, to cover most of the damages. And then but besides that, Nepal has been formulating few other mechanisms to promote the human-wildlife coexistence. For example, buffer zone concept is one of the great example. Through the buffer zone mechanism, around 30 to 50% of the income from the park can be distributed in the buffer zone for their community development, educations, livelihood upliftment, and then the human-wildlife mitigations. The another mechanism that government has been formulating is habitat management. They have been providing the support for the habitat management, like making the water hole maintenance throughout the year to provide the water resources for the wildlife, and then the grassland for the prey species. Additionally, the Nepal government has been formulating the species-specific conservation action plan. And then mobilizing the community is another great step or the mechanism that government has been adopting to integrate the community in the conservation. The another is corridor connectivity and the maintenance, identifying the potential wildlife movement areas or the transboundary like the animal route. Government has been trying to establish the corridor and maintaining for the easy passes of these animals. The important aspect of the Nepal government has been doing is the transboundary collaboration and cooperations. That means most of the animals in the Terai arc landscape are landscape level animals. They are moving between India and Nepal. So transboundary is key, and the Nepal has been focusing in that aspect as well.
No, it's a comprehensive range of different tools and strategies being used by the government, and it's really good that local people living alongside tigers are kind of at the forefront of those efforts. Our next question is, do Nepal's protected areas have the capacity to hold the existing tiger population in the context of such rapid growth over the past decade?
Yeah, that is very interesting, and then everybody has that kind of concern in Nepal. In the last 12, 13 years, Nepal has achieved the target of doubling the tiger number. That means almost triple the tiger population in the landscape. So we have been we have 355 tiger population in Nepal, and then if we see the prey base in the landscape, we have a good number of the prey base. I think with that information, we can see the tiger existing tiger population can be sustained for long term. One of the study that has been carried out in Chiton Parsa complex about the ecological carrying capacity in the area, it identified that Chiton Parsa complex can hold around 175 tigers in that landscape. And one of the preliminary study in Baki Bardia complex identified 160 or 161 tiger population in that landscape. And then another study in the Suklafata, the preliminary study identified around 60 tigers can be sustained in that landscape. With that, I think around 400 tigers can be maintained in the landscape. So if we maintain the habitat and the prey base, the existing tiger can be sustained for long term.
Well, that's a really kind of hopeful point to make, I think, ensuring that there's enough space and prey for tigers, that these incredible numbers can be sustained. I think we as conservationists need as many good news stories as possible. So that's really, really great to hear. For the next question, I know we may have touched upon elements of this already, but how are the local communities living alongside tigers benefiting from tiger conservation approaches?
Yeah, if you see the Nepal's tiger bearing protected areas, these are the highly touristic areas. So people are getting benefit from the tourist activities. The government and the conservation institutions have been promoting the ecotourism in that area. So people are getting benefit through tourism. They can have like such kind of activities related to the ecotourisms. If one of the data suggests that more than 300,000 people are visiting national park in the tiger bearing protected areas in Nepal. Out of these 300,000 people, around 100,000 people are foreigners. That means the peoples are getting from that kind of tourism activities. The another one is, as I mentioned, the proportion concept. The park can generate the revenue that goes to the communities through the proportion mechanisms. So and then also the conservation measures or conservation organizations and the government has been focusing their livelihood upliftment through the capacity enhancement activities and then the alternative income generating activities. So people are getting through conservations in that landscape.
Yeah, but I guess it's all about ensuring that local people can derive as much benefits from the tourism that comes from the tiger tourism and protected area tourism. Specifically thinking about ZSL, how do you foresee our role in ensuring tigers can be sustained within the Terai landscape?
Yeah, that is great. And then we have been these questions can we can elaborate our approaches for the tiger conservations. So basically, for the tiger conservation, ZSL has been focusing 4 aspects. The first is the human tiger coexistence, promoting human tiger coexistence in the landscape, providing the awareness and the education campaign in the area, providing the behavioral campaigns, behavioral change campaigns in the communities, having mitigative structures like some kind of fences in that area, site-specific quick relief fund, because sometimes Nepal government the relief amount process is lengthy, and then the people have to wait to receive that amounts that they have claimed for. So in that scenario, the site-specific QRF can support them for their damage in a meantime when they have been waiting for the government relief amount. And then we have been also working on the predator-proof corals and other kind of mitigating measures that people can be coexist with the tigers. The another approaches that we have been focusing on is the habitat and the wildlife management or their monitoring. So we have been regular monitoring the tigers and the prey base in the landscape. And then if there is any kind of problematic tiger, we have been providing some kind of technical support to the Department of National Park for their rescue. But the Department of National Park has been working slightly in the rescue operations and the mitigation of the conflict in this area. And so ZSL is promoting such kind of activity through the Department of National Park. And then another one is management effectiveness, providing the infrastructure support to the government or the park, providing the capacity enhancement activities or training to the park staffs to monitor the wildlife, to analyze the informations, to provide the habitat, to create the suitable habitat for the wildlife. This kind of capacity enhancement activities is also carried out through judicial. And the last one is livelihood improvement. We have been supporting the local community for their alternative income generating activities, providing the capacities or trainings to them to involve in the alternative income generating activities, and also providing some kind of community banking schemes to provide a soft loan to the community so that they can start their small businesses or small activities, income generating activities in the community, so that their dependency can be mitigated, can be reduced towards forest resources. Thank you, man. That's yeah.
So it's a comprehensive range of activities, and I guess the key thing to really hammer home is that communities are put at the centre of our human-wildlife conflict coexistence mitigation approaches, a real focus on improving livelihoods and really making sure that they're the focus of our interventions, and also working with our partners in country who are managing protected areas and corridors. So thanks for that. And I will close on one final question, which is, what measures are needed for the long-term conservation of tigers and other wildlife in the Terai landscape in the climate change context?
Yeah, climate change is very, very critical, and then we have a limited research that has been carried out to relate the climate change with the wildlife or human-wildlife conflict in the area. So we have some sporadic, evidence of having tiger spotted in the mid-hills And one of these studies identified the potential tiger habitat could be in the Chure as well. So not only Terai, the tigers can prefer to be in the Chure hills, and so in the climate scenario, we can we can expect that tiger can go northward for their habitat. And also the north and south corridor and its maintenance is important for the long term in the climate change scenario. The another is regular monitoring of the tigers and tracking some of the animals for their movement is essential to identify the potential corridors and potential management interventions before having some impact in the new areas. And if there is any evidence of tiger spotted in the northward, like in a hill region or in the middles, the peoples are not adapted to cope with the tiger population. So there is a need of education to aware them towards conservations, and then so that the coexistence can be created in that landscape. So and then also the grassland, and then the water hole, because its water hole maintenance is important, because in the climate change scenario, the most of the water holes in the existing protected areas or the tiger bearing protected areas are drying up. So the regular maintenance of these water holes and the grassland is important to keep these species or to make the climate resilient environment for the tiger in the area.
Okay, so it sounds like it's going to be really important in the next few years to really monitor tiger behaviours and the habitats very carefully to see how kind of patterns are changing as climate changes. Their impacts are felt more keenly across the Terai Arc landscape. Okay, that brings us to the end of our Q&A session, and then therefore an end to today's event. I would like to thank Dinesh and Sunjeep for their fantastic presentations and answers to our questions, and for giving us such a good overview of current human-wildlife conflict trends in Nepal. I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for joining our premiere, either on live or on YouTube or on catch-up. Please do check the events page of the ZSL website for more info on other upcoming events, and subscribe to our mailing list to be the first to hear about other events, which can be done using the QR codes on your screen. One final thank you again for coming, and we look forward to your participation in future ZSL events. Good night.
Good night, bye-bye.